I want to say what I believe to be true as clearly and carefully as I possibly can, and I want to see what happens as a consequence. And what people don't understand about that in some sense is your happiness, the purpose of your life is not going to be happiness. Sometimes it is, sometimes that will come, but there will be difficult periods in your life and happiness won't suffice then. But what you can have in your life is an adventure. You can have an adventure. And the truth is the best adventure. There's no doubt about that. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is you don't know what's going to happen if you say what you think. Now, I don't mean incautiously, and I don't mean provocatively or any more than necessary. You don't know what's going to happen. So that's very adventurous. But also, if it's you and your voice, then it's your adventure. And if it isn't, like if you're crafting your speech or manipulating in any way, or parroting or abiding by the dictates of the crowd, then I don't know whose adventure you're having, but it's not yours. Well, kindness is tricky, you know, because one of the things you deal with very commonly if you're a clinical psychologist, apart from depression and anxiety, is, well, behavior therapists offer assertiveness training. And now, the people who need assertiveness training are often people who are too agreeable, compassionate, polite by temperament. Now, the problem with that is that they let people walk all over them because they don't stand up enough for themselves. And the consequence of that is they get resentful, and then they get bitter, and then they get conniving, and then they'll mob. And so, because they'll do anything for everyone else, but they push themselves beyond their limits, and then they won't even recognize the limits because they feel, well, if I'm not doing everything for you, then I'm not a good person. It's like, no, a good person does a little for you. Like if I'm acting properly with you, say in this conversation, there's something in it for you, and there's something in it for me, right? And we want that to be reciprocal. And so the cost of me bending too far in your direction is that I'll become bitter and resentful and conniving. And resentment is an unbelievably toxic state of being. If you could envision a path forward out of your misery, let's say, to somewhere better, what would that look like? And it's not a question people ask themselves with enough depth. And then, having developed that vision, what are the strategies that might be put in place to make that more likely? And again, not in a manipulative way, but if you had to conduct yourself in the proper manner to bring about this desirable end, or at least to move towards it, how would you organize your behavior? One of the things that's been painful about what I've been doing with my wife as we've traveled around the world for the last number of years is to see how desperate people are for an encouraging word. Life is brutally difficult and sometimes unbearably brutally difficult. And you can see the progressives playing with that notion. It's warped into this sense of victimization, but it does reflect some understanding of the underlying tragic reality of life. And so it's good to get that right out on the table to begin with. Say, well, you're miserable, you have your reasons. And they might be deep reasons. But if you let the misery demoralize you and make you bitter and cynical and cowardly and make you withdraw, then first of all, that's a failure in the highest sense on your part, and all it's going to do is make everything worse. And then you might think, well, what do you have to respond to that? How do you respond to that catastrophe and challenge? And the answer is, and this is what Rocky is telling his son in no uncertain terms, is like, terrible as things are, there's a lot more to you than you can possibly imagine. And that if you face those things forthrightly and with some faith and courage, then you can have the adventure of your life and prevail even over catastrophe. Many women have never had a good relationship with anyone masculine in their life. And so the notion that they would need to establish a trusting relationship with a man, especially if he's also in something approximating a superordinate position, which is what they might like to find him maximally attractive, also implies that they're in some sense going to be under his sway. And if there's no trust there, well, that's absolutely terrifying. And I have some sympathy for that, because there are no shortage of women out there who've never had a positive relationship with anyone masculine. And so they're completely unable to discriminate between narcissistic power and compulsion and confident competence. And so because they can't distinguish that and they're afraid, they put all of that in the same category, which is something like the predator category. And that's not good for them.